Story 1. At first, I thought the trucker was warning me about something, but when he matched my every move, his spotlight blinding my face, I knew I was his target. It was a long, quiet highway stretching across miles of darkness. The road had been empty for the last hour. Nothing but the occasional road sign and the dull hum of my tires against the pavement. I was driving home for the semester break, a route I had not taken before, and it always felt a little eerie at night. There were no streetlights, no houses in sight, just endless blackness swallowing the road ahead. I kept my music low, trying to stay alert, but a strange unease settled in my stomach. I could not explain it, but I felt like I was not alone, like someone was watching me. I shook off the thought, blaming exhaustion. Then, in my rearview mirror, I saw it. A truck. Its headlights glowed against the darkness, creeping closer until it was directly behind me. I kept my speed steady, assuming he would pass, but instead he pulled up beside me and stayed there. The massive 18-wheeler rumbled along, matching my speed perfectly. Then a bright spotlight flicked on, blinding me. My hands clenched the steering wheel as I squinted, trying to see past the glare. My stomach twisted. What was he doing? Was he trying to tell me something? I slowed down slightly, expecting him to move ahead, but he did not. He slowed down too. I sped up. He did the same. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He was not just driving. He was watching me. I tried to stay calm, my mind scrambling for a reasonable explanation. Maybe he was just a bored trucker messing around. Maybe he was trying to tell me something was wrong with my car. But my car was fine. I checked my dashboard. No warnings, no strange noises, nothing. Still, something about this felt too deliberate. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. Every instinct screamed at me to get away. But how? I could not stop. There was nowhere safe on this empty highway. I changed lanes, hoping to put some distance between us, but he did not let up. He followed. Every time I moved, he moved. He was playing with me. Then, without warning, he swerved slightly, cutting into my lane just enough to make my heart jump. I yanked the wheel to the side, my tires screeching as I barely avoided him. My hand shook as I gritted my teeth. I was done playing his game. If he wanted to scare me, he was doing a damn good job. But I was not going to be some helpless victim. I slammed my foot on the gas, the speedometer climbing past 90 mph. My small car was fast, built for quick moves. If I could just outrun him, I would be fine. But the moment I thought I had put distance between us, I saw something that made my blood turn ice cold. He was catching up. A vehicle that size should not have been able to move that fast, but somehow he was closing the gap between us way too quickly. His headlights grew brighter, swallowing up the road behind me. The massive truck roared forward, relentless, as if he had been waiting for me to run. My breath hitched. He wanted this chase. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My stomach churned with fear. This was not random. This was not a mistake. Up ahead I saw an exit ramp. My heart pounded. This was my only shot. If I stayed on the highway, he would keep following me. I let him pass me just enough, dropping into his blind spot. Then, at the very last second, I swerved hard to the right, taking the exit at high speed. My tires skidded, the car shaking as I barely made the turn. I held my breath, my pulse hammering as I checked my mirrors. The highway disappeared behind me. The truck was gone. I pulled into an empty parking lot, my hands still shaking as I turned off the engine. My breath was ragged, my mind racing. What the hell just happened? I stepped out, walking around my car, expecting to see some damage, some sign that he had tried to warn me about something. But my car was fine. It had never been about my car. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to collect myself. My legs felt weak, and my heart refused to slow down. The parking lot was deserted, just a few dim streetlights flickering above. I checked my phone. No messages, no news alerts, no sign that anything unusual had happened on that highway. But I knew what I had experienced. I had not imagined it. After what felt like forever, I finally got back into my car and drove to the nearest 24-hour diner. I parked under the bright neon lights, the presence of people making me feel a little safer. I ordered a coffee, my hands still trembling as I wrapped them around the warm cup. My eyes flickered toward the road every few seconds. Was he still out there? Was he looking for me? I sat there for a long time, replaying the events in my head. It did not make sense. Why had he done that? What was the point? If he had wanted to mess with me, why had he chased me so aggressively? And why did he only back off when I took the exit? The more I thought about it, the worse the fear settled in my chest. Was he just messing with me? Or was he waiting for me to make a mistake? Maybe he was hoping I would panic and lose control of my car. Maybe he wanted me to crash. Or maybe he had a different plan entirely. Even now, I do not know what that driver wanted. But I do know one thing. If I had not taken that exit, I might not have made it home at all. Story 2. The first rock hit my windshield, then another. And just as I reached for the gear shift, I saw him. A man stepping out of the trees, gripping a shovel, staring right at us. Driving through empty roads had always been our favorite way to pass time. My fiancée, Mia, and I loved exploring the countryside, taking random turns just to see where we would end up. Some nights, we would drive for hours, discovering strange little towns, old abandoned gas stations, and roads that seemed to stretch into nowhere. It was exciting, peaceful, and sometimes eerie, but we never felt real fear. Until that night. It was a cold November evening, and rain drizzled lightly against the windshield. We had been driving for a while, completely lost, but enjoying the adventure. Mia was scrolling through the map on my phone, trying to figure out where we were, but the roads had no names, just endless paths cutting through the dense woods. The headlights barely lit up the road ahead, and a thick fog settled in, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of us. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a narrow, twisting road breaking off from the main one. A shortcut, maybe. I turned onto it without thinking, ignoring the way Mia tensed beside me. The road was rough, covered in mud and fallen branches from the storm the night before. I drove slowly, the trees closing in on both sides, making it feel like we were going deeper into some forgotten place. After about 10 minutes, the road opened into a clearing, and there it was, an old house. It sat at the end of the path, hidden between the thick trees, as if it had been swallowed by the forest itself. The structure was barely standing, its walls cracked, windows shattered. The roof sagged, and vines had crawled up its sides, strangling it. A broken-down truck sat in the yard, rusted and covered in leaves, as if it had not moved in years. Something about the place felt wrong, like it was waiting for something. Mia grabbed my arm. "Let's turn around." Her voice was shaky. I nodded, reaching for the gear shift. Then something slammed against the windshield. A rock. Before we could react, another one hit the hood, bouncing off with a sharp clang. My heart jumped into my throat as I turned the headlights toward the trees. A figure moved between the shadows. Then, from the side of the house, a man stepped out from the bushes. He was holding a shovel. His coat was filthy, his face partly hidden beneath the brim of a hat. But even from a distance, I could see his eyes locked onto us. He did not move. He just stood there, gripping the shovel tightly. Mia's breathing turned ragged. "Go. Now." But before I could shift into reverse, the front door of the house creaked open. A woman stepped out. She was tall and thin, her long gray hair tangled around her shoulders. She stood just beyond the glow of the headlights, her face hidden in the shadows. Her hands, they were stained dark as if she had been digging through something wet and rotten. She wiped them on her dress, slowly, deliberately, never looking away. My blood ran cold. Mia was screaming at me, pulling at my sleeve, but I barely heard her. I was frozen. The woman tilted her head, and then she smiled. It was not a normal smile. It was something wrong, something that sent terror straight into my bones. Then the man with the shovel took a step forward. That was enough. I slammed my foot on the gas, throwing the car into reverse, my tires skidding wildly in the mud. The moment I turned back onto the road, I floored it, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. Mia was crying beside me, still looking back, her voice barely above a whisper. They were watching us the whole time. We thought it was over. We thought we had escaped. We were wrong. Not even 5 minutes later, headlights appeared behind us. At first, I told myself it was just another driver. But then the lights sped up. The vehicle, a truck, stayed right behind us, its high beams blinding. My stomach dropped. "It is them," Mia whispered, gripping my arm. I pressed harder on the gas, but the truck matched our speed. Every time I turned, it turned. It refused to let us go. My knuckles turned white against the steering wheel as I took another sharp turn, the tires skidding against the wet road. The truck stayed right behind us. For nearly 30 minutes, the truck chased us, refusing to fall back, refusing to pass. Every time I thought I could lose them, they would appear again, headlights burning into my mirrors. My mind raced. What do they want? Were they trying to run us off the road? Were they waiting for us to stop? I could feel Mia trembling beside me. "Find a gas station," she choked out. "Anywhere with people." Then, up ahead, I saw the bright glow of a gas station sign. It was small, but there were cars parked outside. I took the exit, barely slowing down as I pulled into the parking lot. The truck did not follow. It kept driving, disappearing into the night, as if it had never been there. For a long time, neither of us moved. The rain tapped against the roof of the car, our heavy breathing the only sound. Mia wiped her face with shaky hands, her eyes red. "They were going to follow us home," she whispered. The words sent a chill through me. Even now, I do not know who they were. I do not know why they were so desperate to keep us from leaving that house. But one thing is clear. We were never supposed to make it out. Story 3. I told myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the mind. But when I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw him sitting in my back seat, I realized I was not imagining this. I had been on the road for hours, barely keeping my eyes open. My job interviews were in the morning, and I had no choice but to drive through the night. Coffee could only do so much. The highway stretched ahead of me, dark and empty, with no signs of life except the occasional headlights in the distance. That was when I first saw him, a man in a suit standing on the side of the road. He was completely still, not hitchhiking, not walking, just standing. I barely had time to process it as I passed, but something made my skin crawl. His head moved slowly, tracking my car as I drove by. My stomach twisted, but I shook it off. Maybe he was stranded. Maybe he was waiting for a ride. It was late, and my exhaustion was getting to me. I needed to focus on getting to my hotel, but 10 minutes later, I saw another man in a suit, or maybe it was the same one. He stood in the exact same pose, facing the road, his head turning ever so slightly as I passed. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my pulse quickening. This was not normal. I needed to snap myself out of it. Maybe I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. I pulled into a small gas station for more coffee, stretching my legs and splashing cold water on my face in the restroom. When I came back outside, I froze. Under the flickering light post at the edge of the parking lot, he was there again, standing completely still, just watching. My breath caught in my throat. My mind screamed at me to get in the car, to drive, to leave immediately. I turned the key in the ignition and sped out of there without looking back. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe it was just a guy who happened to stop at the same gas station, but I could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The coffee was not enough anymore. My body was exhausted, my mind on edge. I decided to pull into an empty parking lot to rest. Just for a few minutes, I adjusted my seat, locked the doors, and closed my eyes. But sleep would not come. Every time I started drifting off, my nerves jolted me awake, my body convinced I was being watched. Then it happened. The feeling of something behind me, the instinctive, gut-wrenching certainty that I was not alone. My fingers trembled as I reached for the rearview mirror. I barely breathed as I tilted it slightly. And there he was, sitting in the back seat. His face was blank, his suit flawless, his eyes locked on mine. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I flung the door open and tumbled out, hitting the pavement hard. My heart pounded against my ribs as I scrambled away from the car, gasping for air. But when I turned back, the back seat was empty. The car was completely still. There was no one inside. I could not think, could not rationalize it. Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? My pulse was still hammering, my breath coming in shaky gasps. I needed to get out of here. I jumped back into the car, locked the doors, and floored it. The rest of the drive was a blur. I kept glancing at the mirror, half expecting to see him again. But there was nothing, just the empty road and the growing ache of exhaustion clawing at me. By the time I reached my hotel, I was a mess. My hands shook as I checked in, barely making it to my room before collapsing onto the bed. I could not process what had happened. My mind kept replaying it, his face in the mirror, the emptiness that followed. Maybe it was a trick of my tired brain. Maybe my exhaustion had pushed me into some kind of hallucination. I did not know. All I knew was that I needed sleep. The next morning, I forced myself to push the night's events aside. I had an important interview, and I could not afford to be distracted. But the moment I stepped into the office and my interviewer walked in, my body went cold. He was wearing the same suit. He had the same short, dark hair, the same blank, expressionless face. My mouth went dry. My legs felt like they were cemented to the floor. He tilted his head slightly, studying me, just like he had on the side of the road. I tried to act normal, tried to push through the interview, but I was drowning in panic. Every question he asked, every word that left his mouth, only made my skin crawl more. It was him. I knew it. But how? How was he here? When the interview ended, I barely remembered what I had said. I walked out in a daze, my mind racing. This could not be real. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I had seen someone else on the road and my mind had just linked them together. Maybe my exhaustion had distorted my memory. But deep down, I knew the truth. That man had been watching me all night. He had been following me. And now, he was standing right in front of me, pretending like we had never met. I did not get that job. I barely even remember the second interview I had that day. All I know is that when I left, I kept looking over my shoulder, scanning the roads, the parking lots, the reflections in glass windows. I never saw him again, but I still feel his eyes on me. Even now, late at night, when the roads are empty, I cannot help but wonder if he is still out there, waiting for me to look in the mirror one more time. Story 4. I was alone on the road when my tire warning flashed. But the moment I pulled over, I heard an engine. No headlights, just creeping closer in the dark. I was not alone anymore. I had been driving for hours, trying to get home as quickly as possible. It was well past midnight and the road stretched endlessly ahead of me, flanked by thick, unbroken woods. The occasional streetlight flickered, but for the most part, I was surrounded by darkness. My fuel gauge was running low, so I stopped at a lonely gas station in the middle of nowhere. There was only one other car at the pump, an old rusted pickup truck. The man beside it was filling his tank, his clothes worn and dirty. He turned his head slowly, locking eyes with me as I walked into the station to pay. I felt his gaze follow me, but I ignored it, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After grabbing a coffee, I stepped back outside and saw the truck still there, its owner now sitting inside, his hands gripping the wheel. The second I started my engine, his headlights flickered on, and he pulled out, turning in the same direction I was headed. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just a coincidence. About 10 minutes down the road, I spotted something ahead. On the grassy shoulder, just barely visible in the moonlight, was that same pickup truck, now parked with its lights off. My stomach tensed. Why would he pull over in the middle of nowhere? As I passed, I resisted the urge to slow down, gripping the steering wheel tighter. Just as I was starting to shake off the unease, my dashboard beeped. A bright orange warning flashed. One of my tires was losing air fast. Confused, I listened closely and heard the unmistakable thumping sound of a flat tire. My heart pounded as I realized I had no choice but to stop. I eased onto the side of the road, stepping out into the cold night air. The rear driver's side tire was completely flat. That was when I heard it. The low, rumbling sound of an engine. My breath hitched. It was coming from behind me, but when I turned around, all I saw was darkness. No headlights, no sign of a vehicle approaching. And then, like a slow reveal, I saw it. A faint outline of a truck, completely silent, rolling toward me with its lights off. I did not think. I ran. My body moved before my mind could process what was happening. I bolted toward the trees, my shoes crunching against the dirt as I dove into the shadows. Ducking behind a thick bush, I covered my mouth, struggling to steady my breathing. The truck came to a stop beside my car, and the door creaked open. Heavy footsteps crunched against the gravel. I peeked through the leaves, my body stiff with terror. The man from the gas station stood next to my car, scanning the area as if searching for me. My heart hammered in my chest as he leaned down, running his fingers over my slashed tire. My stomach turned. I had not run over anything. This was deliberate. He had done this. My hands shook as I reached for my phone, but before I could dial for help, another sound filled the night, the slow approach of another vehicle. Headlights appeared in the distance, growing brighter as a second truck pulled up beside mine. A deep voice called out, "Everything okay here?" The man beside my car straightened up instantly, adjusting his posture. "Yeah, just stopped to help." guy had a flat," he said smoothly, his tone too casual. The other driver hesitated, eyes flicking from him to my empty car. "That so?" he asked. My throat went dry as I realized what was happening. He was pretending my car was his. If I stayed hidden, he might get away with it. I had to do something. Gathering every ounce of courage, I shot out from my hiding place, sprinting toward the road. "Help! I don't know him," I shouted. The driver in the other truck snapped his head toward me, his face twisting in confusion before shifting into understanding. He looked back at the man who had been pretending to be me. "You sure about that?" he asked, his voice tense now. The man in the pickup truck hesitated, his mask slipping. He took a step back, then another. Without a word, he turned and climbed into his truck. The engine roared to life, and he reversed, speeding off into the night, his taillights disappearing into the darkness. The driver of the second truck watched him go before turning to me. "You all right?" I could barely breathe, my body still locked in fear. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. He looked down at my tire, his expression hardening. "That guy do this?" I swallowed hard and nodded again. He muttered a curse under his breath before pulling out his phone. "We need to call the police." Relief washed over me as I realized I was finally safe. Within minutes, a patrol car arrived, its flashing lights casting sharp shadows across the empty road. The officer listened carefully as I explained everything, taking notes as he glanced in the direction the truck had gone. "We'll check the gas station security cameras," he assured me, but I already knew that man would be long gone. The police officer stayed with me while a tow truck was called to fix my tire. The kind stranger who had stopped wished me luck before driving off, and soon it was just me, the officer, and the quiet hum of my car's emergency lights. Even as my tire was replaced and I prepared to continue my drive, I could not shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something truly terrible. If that second truck had not stopped, if I had not run out at the right moment, that man could have easily taken me, and no one would have even known where I had gone. For the rest of the drive home, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see those headlights again, but the road behind me stayed dark, and yet, even now, I still wonder, was he really gone? Or was he just waiting for the next unlucky traveler to pull over on an empty road in the dead of night? Story 5. We thought it was a deer in the middle of the road, but as we got closer, she lifted her head, raised a knife, and started running straight at us. It was nearly 4 a.m., and we had been driving for hours. Danny and I had spent the night at a friend's place, playing games, talking about life, and just wasting time. We had no reason to be out this late, but the drive had become a habit. Late-night cruises through the back roads of Willow Springs, away from the city noise, just empty streets and endless trees stretching into darkness. The air outside was thick with fog, making it harder to see ahead. The silence was strange. Usually, even in the dead of night, there would be distant sounds, crickets, wind through the trees, the occasional distant howl of a coyote. But tonight, there was nothing. It was like the world had paused, waiting for something. The only sound was the low hum of the car engine as we turned onto a long, cracked road leading through a wooded area. The headlights barely cut through the fog, but that was when we saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Danny slowed down. "What the hell is that?" I squinted, trying to make out the shape. At first, it seemed small, like a deer frozen in place. But as we got closer, my chest tightened. It was a woman. Her body was slouched, her long hair tangled and wild, hanging over her face. Her clothes were ripped and stained, dark splotches covering her white shirt and jeans. My stomach twisted. It looked like blood. The car crept forward, the headlights illuminating her fully. That was when she moved. Her head snapped up, her eyes hollow, sunken, wide with terror. And then she ran. Not away, not to the side. She ran straight at us. Her arms flailed wildly, her mouth moving like she was screaming. But we could not hear anything. That was when I saw what she was holding. A knife. A huge, blood-stained knife. Danny did not wait. He floored it. The tires skidded for a split second before gripping the pavement, the engine roaring as we shot forward. My heart was in my throat. I turned in my seat, looking back, expecting to see her still chasing after us. But she was gone, just like that, like she had never been there at all. Danny was breathing heavily, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. I checked my phone, praying for a signal. Nothing. "Did you see that?" Danny's voice was shaky. "Tell me I wasn't seeing things." I swallowed hard. "You saw her. She had a knife, Danny. She was covered in blood." Neither of us knew what to say. Who was she? Was she hurt? Was she dangerous? Was she even real? The road stretched on in eerie silence, the headlights showing nothing but empty asphalt ahead. We did not stop until we hit the highway, where the lights and distant signs of life felt like a return to reality. By the time we got home, the fear had turned into confusion. Who was she? Was she a victim? A killer? Someone who had escaped something awful? We checked the news for days, waiting to see if anyone reported a missing woman, a stabbing, anything. But there was nothing. No police reports, no witnesses. No one else had seen her. It was like she had never existed. I kept searching, checking local forums, crime reports, social media. Still nothing. It did not make sense. Someone like that, covered in blood, running in the middle of a deserted road with a knife, should have been found. I tried to forget, but the image of her face, her hollow eyes, the silent scream, the way she charged at the car, never left me. I still think about her, about what happened after we drove away. Did she just disappear back into the woods? Was she ever found? Or is she still out there, wandering those roads, waiting for the next car to come along? Weeks passed, and every night I found myself unable to sleep. I would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence of my house, but my mind always drifted back to that night. I could still see her, her wild hair, her blood-stained clothes, the knife clenched in her fist. Sometimes I convinced myself that I should have told the police, that maybe she needed help. But what if she had been the danger? What if stopping would have been the biggest mistake of our lives? One night, I had a dream, or maybe it was not a dream at all. I was back in the car with Danny, driving down that same road, except this time, the woman did not stand in the middle of the street. She was running alongside the car. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, her feet barely touching the ground, her hollow eyes locked onto me. She was grinning. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. She lunged for the door handle, and just as her fingers curled around it, I woke up, gasping for air. I told Danny about it the next day. "Man, I've been having weird dreams too," he admitted. "Last night, I woke up, and I swear I heard footsteps outside my window. I got up to check, but there was nothing there." I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the unease. "We're just messing with ourselves. We got freaked out, that's all." But even as I said it, I did not believe it. A month later, I was scrolling through local crime reports again, just out of habit. And that was when I saw it. A post about a woman who had gone missing 2 years ago. The case had gone cold. No leads, no body, no suspects. The only thing the police had was a single witness statement. A truck driver had been driving through Willow Springs late at night when a woman, matching her description, had run out onto the road. He had swerved to avoid hitting her, but when he got out to check, she was gone. He was the last person to ever see her. Until us. I stared at the screen, my blood turning to ice. Could it have been her? Had we seen a ghost, a warning, or something worse? I never told Danny about what I found. He had already started moving on, and I did not want to drag him back into the fear. But sometimes when I drive alone at night, I swear I see something at the edge of the road, a shape, a shadow, standing there, waiting. And every time I grip the wheel a little tighter, because deep down I know if I ever stop, she'll finally catch up to me. Story 6. I heard a woman screaming for help in the middle of the woods, but no matter how fast I ran, I never got any closer. Then the scream came from right behind me. My whole body froze. It was almost midnight when I finished my late shift at the diner. I was exhausted, my head heavy from hours of work. The roads were empty, houses spread far apart with dim porch lights glowing in the distance. The air was warm, the silence comforting. I had driven down this road 100 times before, and nothing about it had ever felt strange. But tonight, everything felt wrong. As I passed a long stretch of woods, a woman's scream tore through the night, sharp, desperate, echoing through the trees. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. I slowed down, listening. Another scream rang out, this time even clearer. Help me, please. I pulled my car to the side of the road, my heart pounding. Someone was in trouble. A woman was lost, hurt, or worse, being attacked. I could not just drive away. I grabbed the flashlight from my glove compartment and the baton from under my seat before stepping into the humid night air. The road behind me stretched into the distance, empty, lifeless. Hello? Who's there? I called out. Instantly, the voice answered from the darkness. Help me, please. I need help. Her voice sounded close, yet far, like it was floating through the trees. I aimed my flashlight toward the woods, but all I saw were tangled branches and shadows shifting with the wind. Keep talking. I'm coming to help, I shouted as I stepped past the tree line. She screamed again, just as desperate. I hurried forward, pushing through the brush, stepping over fallen branches, my breathing turning unsteady. But something was wrong. No matter how fast I ran, her voice never got any closer. I stopped. My flashlight barely illuminated the path ahead, and the darkness around me felt suffocating. My breathing sounded too loud in the silence. Where are you? Tell me where you are, I shouted again. 5 seconds later, the same scream came. Help me. My blood ran cold. It was not just that the scream was still the same distance away. It was the exact same scream, the same tone, the same words. like a recording. My stomach twisted. I turned around, sweeping my flashlight across the trees. That was when I felt it. A presence. Something unseen. Watching me. Closing in, the air grew heavy, pressing down on me. Then the scream came again, but this time it was right behind me. I did not look back. I ran. Branches whipped against my arms and legs as I sprinted back toward the road. Every few seconds, the scream came again, always at the same distance, like it was chasing me, keeping pace. My lungs burned, but I pushed forward. Through the gaps in the trees, I saw something that made my heart nearly stop. The glow of my car's headlights. I broke through the trees, stumbled onto the road, and did not stop. I yanked open the door, jumped inside, and locked the doors. My hands trembled as I started the engine, my headlights cutting through the darkness. The forest stood silent behind me. No more screams. I put the car in drive and sped off. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me. But deep down, I knew that was a lie. The screams had been real, too real. And the way they followed me, always at the same distance, sent a deep, unnatural fear crawling under my skin. I could not shake the feeling that something had been leading me further into the woods. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with possibilities. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That I heard a voice in the woods that never got closer? That I felt like I was being lured into something unseen? They would think I was insane. So I did nothing. I forced myself to move on. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made my stomach drop. A hiker and his dog had discovered a woman's body in those same woods. She had been dead for at least a week. My chest tightened. A week. That meant she was already dead when I heard those screams. The worst part, there were no signs of foul play, no injuries, no struggle. She had simply died. If she had been dead the whole time, then who or what had been screaming for help that night? I could not breathe. My hands shook as I read the article. The woman was in her mid-30s, her body found deep in the woods, far beyond where I had gone. The police had no explanation for how she died. No cause of death, no suspects, just a lifeless body lying among the trees. The thought sent shivers down my spine. What if I had kept going that night? What if I had followed the screams all the way to the end? Would I have found her? Or would I have found something else? For weeks, I felt like something was watching me. I stopped taking that road at night. I could not bear to look at those woods. knowing what had been found inside them, knowing what I had almost walked into. My sleep was restless, filled with nightmares of endless trees and a voice calling for help, leading me further and further into the dark. Sometimes I would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced that I could still hear it. That same scream, that same desperate voice. I never told anyone what really happened that night. The few people I did tell laughed it off. You probably just heard an animal, they said. It was just your imagination. But they did not hear what I heard. They did not feel what I felt. And they did not know what I knew. That woman had been dead. There was no logical reason for me to have heard her voice, unless it was not her voice at all, unless something else had been using it. Years have passed, but the memory of that night never faded. I moved to a different town, far from Maple Hollow, far from those woods. But sometimes, even now, I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, my ears straining in the silence. Because sometimes, if I listen closely, I swear I can still hear it. A woman's scream, somewhere in the distance, calling for help, but never getting closer. Story 7. I was wiping snow off my car when a stranger at the diner turned in his seat and smiled. "There's a cheap motel up the road," he said. "Safe, warm, and perfect for the night." I wish I had never listened to him. The snow was falling heavier now, covering the roads in a thick white blanket. My little car was struggling, its tires slipping as I tried to stay steady. I had been driving for hours, making my way to visit my boyfriend Tyler, who lived in another state. We had planned this trip for weeks, but the weather had taken a sudden bad turn. A blizzard warning had flashed on my phone earlier, but I had ignored it. Now, I was regretting it. The roads were nearly empty, the streetlights barely cutting through the misty snowfall. My fingers tightened on the wheel as I realized I could not keep driving like this. I needed to find a place to stay. When I spotted a small diner at the side of the road, I pulled in. It was one of those places that looked like it had been around forever, the kind that never closed. Inside, the warm air hit my frozen skin, and I let out a breath I had not realized I was holding. I ordered a sandwich and coffee, hoping to warm up and figure out my next move. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, told me it was dangerous to keep driving. "You should stay somewhere for the night," she said. "There are a few motels nearby." Before I could ask for suggestions, the man sitting at the bar turned to face me. "There's a good one just up the road," he said, with a friendly smile. He was in his 40s, with thinning hair and a heavy jacket. Something about the way he looked at me made my stomach tighten, but I forced a polite smile. "It's cheap, quiet, and just 5 minutes from here," he added. I hesitated, but I was exhausted, and I did not want to spend the night stuck in my car. I nodded, thanked him, and finished my meal. As I left, I felt his eyes on me the whole time. The motel was exactly as he described: small, old, and almost empty. A faded sign flickered at the entrance, the neon buzzing weakly. There were only a few cars in the lot, covered in a fresh layer of snow. I parked near the office and hurried inside. The front desk worker barely looked up as I asked for a room. He was a thin man, uninterested, his eyes glued to a small TV. $50, he mumbled, sliding a key across the counter. I took it and hurried back out into the cold. The room smelled stale, like damp carpet and old cigarettes. The wallpaper was peeling at the edges, and the single lamp on the nightstand cast a dull yellow glow. It was not much, but it was warm, and that was all I needed. I locked the door behind me and sighed, dropping my bag on the bed. I pulled out my phone to FaceTime Tyler, but the signal was weak. Annoyed, I put on my coat and stepped back out, heading to the front desk to ask for the Wi-Fi password. As I stepped outside, I noticed something that made my breath hitch. Fresh footprints in the snow. They led from a car at the far end of the lot, straight to my door. My heart pounded. Had someone followed me? I looked around, but there was no one outside. The air was silent, except for the soft whisper of falling snow. Swallowing my fear, I rushed to the office and got the Wi-Fi password, then hurried back to my room. The moment I shut the door, I locked it again. My hands were shaking. I told myself I was overreacting, that maybe someone else had checked in earlier. Still, I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I tried calling Tyler, but even with Wi-Fi, the video kept freezing. We switched to texting instead. "Made it to a motel," I typed. "Long drive, super tired." Then, a sound. A soft creak. My head snapped toward the bathroom door. It was closed. I tried to remember. Had I shut it earlier? My stomach twisted as a second thought crept in. Or had someone else? My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call someone. Then I heard it. A slow, deliberate shuffle. There was someone inside. I bolted for the door, yanking it open and running straight to the front desk. My breath came in panicked gasps as I told the worker, "There's someone in my room." The man barely reacted. He sighed, picked up the phone, and spoke in a language I did not recognize. I expected him to call the police, but he never did. Instead, he told me to sit tight. My skin crawled. He did not seem surprised at all. Then I saw him, the man from the diner. He stepped out of my motel room, walking calmly toward his car, as if nothing had happened. He did not run. He did not even look in my direction. He just got in, started the engine, and slowly drove away, the red glow of his taillights disappearing into the snowy night. My legs felt weak. I could not breathe. He had been inside the whole time. The front desk worker finally spoke. "You can take a different room," he said, lazily, handing me another key. That was it. No police, no concern, just another room. My mind screamed at me to leave, but where would I go? The storm was worse now, the roads nearly invisible. I had no choice. Shaking, I grabbed my bag and moved to the new room. This time, I shoved a chair against the door. I barely slept. Every noise made my heart race. Every shadow made me flinch. By morning, the storm had eased just enough for me to leave. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I looked back one last time. The motel stood there, quiet and lifeless, the same few cars still covered in snow. A terrible thought crossed my mind. Had I been the first? The drive to Tyler's house felt surreal. The moment I arrived, I locked the doors and collapsed into his arms, shaking. I told him everything. He wanted to go back, to demand answers, but I begged him not to. I just wanted to forget. I tried calling the diner later, warning them about the man, but the number was disconnected. It was as if the place had never existed. I still do not know what would have happened if I had not left that room. The thought keeps me awake at night. I never stay in motels anymore, and I never trust strangers. But the scariest part, I do not think that man was trying to rob me. He never took anything. He was just there, watching, waiting. Story 8. It was supposed to be a simple drive, just something to pass the time. Liam and Emma had spent the evening watching movies at his place, but boredom crept in. It was late, nearly 11 p.m., when Liam suggested they go for a nighttime drive. Emma hesitated at first, but the idea of cruising down the empty roads, listening to music, and just being away from everything sounded nice. The town of Hollow Creek was small, surrounded by miles of woods and farmland. At night, it felt even smaller, almost deserted. Liam took the back roads, where there were no streetlights, just the glow of his headlights cutting through the darkness. They drove for about an hour, talking, laughing, enjoying the quiet. But soon, Liam felt the urge to pee. He pulled onto a narrow dirt road deep in the woods, far from the main highway. It was the kind of place where no one would bother them. Emma sighed. Do you have to do it here? Liam chuckled. Unless you want me to do it in the car. She rolled her eyes, but admitted she needed to go too. They both got out, stepping onto the uneven ground. The night was completely still. No crickets, no wind, just silence. Liam unzipped, but as soon as he did, a strong, sickening stench hit him. It was overwhelming, like something rotting. Emma gagged. Oh my God, what is that? Liam covered his nose, breathing through his mouth. Dead animal, probably. Emma turned toward the trees. It smells too strong for that. They tried to ignore it, finishing quickly, eager to get back in the car, but as they walked back, a sound froze them in place. A scream. It was distant, but clear, high-pitched, painful, like someone was being hurt. Emma's hand gripped Liam's arm. Did you hear that? Liam's heart pounded. Yeah. The scream came again, this time closer. Emma pulled him toward the car. We need to go. But Liam hesitated. What if someone needs help? Emma's eyes widened. No, Liam, we are not doing this. Another scream echoed through the trees. Liam took a deep breath. I just want to check. Stay in the car. Lock the doors. Emma shook her head. Please, just leave it alone. But Liam had already started walking toward the trees. The forest was pitch black. His phone's flashlight barely cut through the thick shadows. Every step crunched against fallen leaves. The stench was even worse now, making his stomach churn. He moved carefully, scanning between the trees, but he saw nothing. No movement. No sign of anyone. Hello? His voice felt small in the vast darkness. No answer. Just silence. He swallowed hard. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe they should just leave. He lifted his phone and turned on the camera flash. He held it up and snapped a quick picture. The bright burst of light lit up the trees for a split second. Then darkness swallowed them again. Liam lowered the phone and looked at the photo. His breath caught in his throat. Just beyond where his light had reached, a man stood between the trees. He was facing Liam, completely still. His eyes reflected the light, making them appear white and hollow. But what sent pure terror through Liam's body was what was at his feet. A blue tarp. Liam's blood ran cold. The tarp was spread on the ground, slightly wrinkled, as if something heavy was underneath it. The man did not move. He just stood there, waiting. Liam felt like he was going to be sick. His entire body screamed, "Run!" He did not turn. He did not breathe. He just took a step backward, then another. The man did not move, but he was watching Liam the way a predator watches prey. Liam spun around and sprinted back to the car. His legs felt weak, but he pushed forward, his breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Emma saw his face, and unlock the doors immediately. What? What is it? Lock the doors. Liam threw himself inside, slamming the door shut. He jammed the key into the ignition, hands shaking. Emma's voice was frantic. Liam, what did you see? He put the car in reverse so fast the tires kicked up dirt. There's a man in the woods. Emma's face drained of color. What? He's just standing there. His throat tightened. There's something under a tarp. We need to leave. Now. Emma spun around, looking out the windows. The headlights illuminated the dirt road, but the forest remained a black void. Liam slammed on the gas. The car skidded, then took off down the road. His hands clenched the wheel tight. His knuckles turned white. The smell of rot still clung to the air, even as they sped away. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Liam's mind raced. What had he just seen? A hunter? A hiker? No, no one stood that still. No one watched like that. And the blue tarp, the shape underneath it. It was too large for an animal. Emma finally broke the silence. Are we calling the police? Liam swallowed, trying to steady his breathing. He should. He knew he should. But what would he even say? That a man was standing in the woods with a tarp? That he took a picture of something that might be a body? He could already imagine the police brushing it off. Instead, he just shook his head. I don't know. They never spoke about it again. Liam deleted the picture, not because he wanted to forget, but because every time he looked at it, he felt like the man in the photo was staring right at him. A week later, a missing person report was issued. A local hiker had vanished without a trace. The last place he had been seen, Hollow Creek Woods. Liam never told anyone, but he knew. He knew where they should have looked. Story 9. I thought I was stranded alone. I thought the deer were acting strange. I thought I was just paranoid. I was wrong. Because as I drove away, I saw him stepping out of the trees, watching me leave. Late night drives had always been my way of escaping reality. Something about the open roads, the quiet hum of my car, and the vast emptiness of the countryside made me feel at peace. I would fill my gas tank, grab a drink, and drive until the sun came up. It had become a habit, a ritual of solitude. That night was no different, or at least I thought it would be. I did not know I was about to experience something that would haunt me forever. It had rained heavily the night before, the kind of storm that rattles windows and sends tree branches crashing to the ground. The roads were still slick, the air thick with the smell of wet earth. I decided to head toward an old park at the end of a long, empty stretch of road. It was a place I had been to before, surrounded by thick trees, its walking trails stretching deep into the woods. I never saw anyone there at night. That was part of the appeal. The drive was peaceful at first. My headlights cut through the darkness. The road ahead, nothing but a tunnel of empty space. But as I reached the park, I saw something that made my heart sink. A fallen tree blocked the road. It was not huge, but it was enough to stop me from continuing. I sighed, knowing I would have to turn around. That was when I made my first mistake. Instead of backing up carefully, I tried to turn my car around on the grass. The moment my tires left the pavement, I felt them sink. I pressed the gas pedal, but the wheels only spun in place, kicking up mud. I tried again. Nothing. Panic crept into my chest. I was stuck in the middle of nowhere with no one around for miles. My phone had a signal, at least, so I called a tow truck. The dispatcher told me someone would be there in about an hour and a half. I had no choice but to wait. I locked my doors, leaned back in my seat, and tried to relax. That was when I noticed the deer. At first, they did not seem strange. A large group of them stood in the open field ahead, their glowing eyes reflecting my headlights. I counted at least 40, all of them just standing there, watching. I tried to ignore the unsettling feeling crawling up my spine. It was just nature, I told myself. Just animals doing animal things. I looked back at my phone, scrolling to distract myself. The deer did not move. Then something changed. Every single deer turned its head at the same time, staring toward the woods. Their bodies froze. Their ears perked up. It was like they had all sensed something at once, something I could not see. My stomach dropped. I turned off my music, listening to the silence around me. Nothing. Just the distant sound of dripping water from the trees, the faint hum of my car engine. But the deer did not relax. They just stood there, locked in place, staring at the same spot in the tree line. I gripped the small pocket knife I kept in my car, suddenly feeling exposed. My breath was shallow, my heartbeat too loud in my ears. I wanted to roll down my window, to listen closer, but some instinct screamed at me not to. Instead, I sat there, waiting and waiting. Minutes dragged by. The deer did not move. Whatever they saw, it was still there. Just when I thought I could not take the tension anymore, headlights appeared in my mirror, the tow truck. Relief flooded my chest as the driver pulled up beside me. I got out quickly, the fresh air hitting my face like a slap. I told him what happened, barely able to keep my voice steady. He laughed, told me it was probably a bobcat or a coyote spooking the deer. I did not argue. I just wanted to get out of there. He hooked my car up, and I stood by, watching. That was when the deer bolted. All at once, As if some invisible force had snapped, they took off in the opposite direction, full speed. Their hooves pounded against the ground as they disappeared into the night. The driver looked up, eyebrows raised. Guess they got scared of something. His voice was light, unconcerned, but my skin crawled. Something had been out there. Something had scared them. 15 minutes later, my car was free. The driver told me to follow him back to the main road. I nodded, got in my car, and gripped the wheel, ready to leave that place behind. As we pulled away, I let out a long breath, my body still tense. I would never come back here again. Then I made the mistake of looking in my rear view mirror. At first, all I saw was darkness, the empty field, the faint glow of my taillights against the wet grass. But as we moved further away, something stepped out from the tree line. A man. He walked slowly, deliberately, out into the open, stopping right where my car had been stuck. He did not run, did not try to follow. He just stood there, watching. My blood ran cold. That man had been there the whole time, watching me panic, watching me sit in my car, helpless, watching me fall asleep. I slammed my foot on the gas, following the tow truck out of the park as fast as I could. My hands were shaking, my breath uneven. I did not stop until I reached the highway, my entire body numb with fear. I never told my parents the full story, never reported it. I knew what they would say. Just some squatter, some homeless man living in the woods. But I knew better. He had been waiting. I have not gone on a late night drive since, and I never will again. Story 10. A stranger stopped to help me on a frozen, empty road. Minutes later, someone tried to break into my truck. As I sped off, my headlights lit up the road ahead, and I saw his car, abandoned. The snowstorm had been raging for hours, covering everything in a thick, suffocating layer of white. I was alone, driving through the desolate roads of Ridgewood Pass, on my way to my cousin James's cabin for the weekend. The route was long, cutting through miles of dense forest with no houses or gas stations for at least an hour. I had always trusted my old Chevy Silverado, but tonight something felt off. The temperature gauge suddenly spiked to red. The engine sputtered. A second later, steam poured from under the hood. I cursed under my breath and pulled onto the icy shoulder. As I turned off the engine, the silence hit me. No passing cars, no wind, just the soft hiss of steam rising from my truck. I reached for my phone to call James, but the screen showed no service. Great. Stuck in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm, with no way to call for help. I sat in the driver's seat, debating my options. I could wait, but the truck was dead, and my battery would not last forever. I thought about walking, but the snow was knee-deep, and I had no idea how far the next town was. Then, as if my prayers had been answered, a pair of headlights appeared in my mirror. A small car approached, its tires crunching against the ice before stopping a few feet behind my truck. The driver's window rolled down and a man leaned out. He looked to be in his late 40s, wearing a thick coat and a beanie. "Truck trouble?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah. Overheating. No cell service out here." He pulled a phone from his pocket and held it out to me. "You can use mine." I hesitated for a second before taking it. As I dialed James's number, the man asked, "You out here alone?" His tone was casual, but something about the question made my stomach twist. I answered quickly, "Yeah, but my cousin's coming to get me." James picked up, and I gave him my location. He promised to call a tow truck and be there soon. I handed the phone back. "Thanks. Help's on the way." The man nodded, rolled up his window, and drove off into the night. I sat back in my seat, exhaling. Something about the guy felt strange. Maybe it was the way he asked if I was alone, or maybe it was just my nerves playing tricks on me. I checked my phone again. Still no signal. I flicked off my headlights for a second, wanting to see just how dark it really was, and immediately regretted it. The world outside disappeared. No moon, no streetlights, just a black void stretching in every direction. My truck felt like a coffin. I quickly turned the lights back on, shaking off the unease. Minutes passed. I checked the time. 1:22 a.m. James would be here soon. But then, out of nowhere, a loud bang hit my passenger window. I jumped, my heart hammering. Someone was outside. The headlights did not reach far enough to show me who it was. Another bang, then a voice. "Hey, please help me." I turned slowly. My breath caught in my throat. A man stood outside my truck, his face hidden by a heavy hood, his breath fogging up the glass. He was gripping the door handle. He pulled at it once, then again, harder. I did not move. My gut screamed, "Do not open the door." "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I got lost," he gasped, still pulling at the handle. "Please, I can't feel my hands. Just let me in for a second." His voice was shaky. desperate, but something felt off. My eyes darted past him, searching the road. Where was his car? He was not dressed like someone who had been walking in the snow for miles. His clothes were too clean, his jacket barely dusted with snow. Why didn't he have a vehicle? My heart pounded. "Where's your car?" I asked. He hesitated, just for a second. Then, instead of answering, he started pounding on the window, harder this time. "Let me in." My blood turned to ice. I slammed my truck into drive, ignoring the warning light flashing on the dashboard. The man saw what I was doing and started punching the glass. I floored it. The engine groaned, struggling against the cold, but I did not stop. I did not look back. I sped forward, barely able to see through the falling snow. Then, as I came around the bend, my headlights caught something ahead. A car, a small Toyota, sitting abandoned on the side of the road. I barely had time to process it before I passed it, but I knew what I had seen. It was his car, the man who had given me his phone, the same one who had asked if I was alone. I slammed my foot on the gas, pushing my truck faster despite the engine's warning signals. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they ached. He never left. He never drove off. He had been waiting for me. 15 minutes later, I saw another pair of headlights. This time, it was the tow truck. Relief flooded through me. I pulled over and jumped out, nearly slipping on the ice as I ran to the driver. "Hey, you all right?" the tow truck driver asked. I pointed back toward the road. There was a guy. He tried to get into my truck. He had a car, but it was empty. He came back and the driver frowned. "A guy? You sure?" I nodded frantically. "His car's just up the road. The Toyota. It's abandoned." The tow truck driver looked past me, down the road. His face darkened. "Son, I just came from that way. There's no car there." My stomach dropped. I turned back toward the road. The snow stretched out, untouched, undisturbed. The Toyota, the footprints, the man, gone. James arrived minutes later. I barely spoke a word as we hooked my truck to the tow. He knew something was wrong, but I could not bring myself to explain. What would I even say? That a stranger tricked me into trusting him, only to come back minutes later? That his car had vanished like it had never been there? That if I had unlocked my door, I might have never been found? I never took that route again. I never drove alone at night in the snow again. But deep down, one question haunted me. What would have happened if I had let him in? Story 11. I stopped to help a man who was running for his life. But when I questioned him, he suddenly stopped shaking, smiled, and whispered, "I was going to help you." Then he grabbed my door handle. It was 3:30 a.m. and I was driving to work like I always did. The roads were nearly empty, the streets lined with dark houses where everyone was still asleep. I had taken this same route for weeks since every other way was blocked due to construction. It had become routine. I was listening to a podcast, the familiar voices helping me stay awake until I could grab my morning coffee. Then, out of nowhere, a strange feeling crept into my stomach. It was not hunger or exhaustion. It was something deeper, something primal. My hands tightened on the wheel as I glanced around. The road was just as quiet as always, nothing unusual in sight, but that feeling, it would not go away. As I turned down a familiar stretch of road, lined with neat rows of houses and dim porch lights, something moved up ahead. At first, I thought it was an animal, a shadow flickering in the distance. But as my headlights swept across the pavement, I saw it clearly. A man. He ran straight into the road, his arms flailing wildly. My heart jumped as I slammed the brakes, my tires screeching against the asphalt. I barely stopped in time. The glow of my headlights lit up his face, and what I saw made my blood turn cold. He looked terrified. His chest heaved with heavy breaths, his wild eyes darting around as if searching for something in the darkness. Then he turned to me, eyes wide, mouth open. I hesitated. I knew better than to trust strangers at this hour. But his fear was so real, so raw, that I rolled my window down just a little. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice cautious. His breathing was erratic. "Someone is trying to kill me. Please, you have to help me." His whole body shook as he spoke, his words tumbling over each other in panic. My fingers curled tighter around the steering wheel. "Who is after you?" His gaze flickered behind him, like he expected someone to lunge from the shadows at any second. "My dog. He was ripped apart in my front yard. I thought it was a coyote. But then I saw a man. He had a knife. He ran at me. I barely got away." Goosebumps crawled up my arms. His voice sounded genuine, filled with fear. But something was not right. My eyes flickered over his clothes. A hunter's jacket, jeans, boots. If he had picked up his dog's body, if he had been running for his life through the night, there should have been something on him. Blood, fur, dirt. But there was nothing. His jacket looked clean, too clean. That strange feeling in my gut twisted into something worse. "Where's the blood?" I asked quietly. The second those words left my mouth, everything changed. His shaking stopped. His breathing evened out too quickly. It was unnatural, like a switch had flipped inside him. The fear drained from his face, his wild expression going blank. My skin prickled. He stared at me, unblinking, for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, his lips curled into a smile, a slow, twisted, unnatural smile. His eyes, once full of panic, darkened. He leaned closer to my window, his voice suddenly calm. "I was going to help you." A wave of ice shot through my veins. My instincts screamed at me. This was wrong. My body moved before my brain could even catch up. He grabbed my door handle. I heard the metallic clink just as I slammed my hand down on the lock button. My other hand flew to the gear shift, yanking it into drive. My tires screeched against the pavement as I hit the gas, the force of acceleration slamming me back into my seat. My breath came in shaky gasps as I sped down the street. My fingers clenched so tight around the steering wheel they ached. I forced myself to look in the rearview mirror. He was still there, standing in the middle of the road, watching me. He did not chase after me. He did not move. He just stood there, smiling. I did not slow down until I reached my workplace. The moment I parked, I locked my doors again as if that would keep me safe. My hands were still shaking. My breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. I wiped my sweaty palms on my pants, trying to steady myself, but my mind kept racing, replaying every detail. His expression, his voice, the way he changed in an instant. I kept thinking about his words. "I was going to help you." Had he been lying about everything? The dog, the attacker? Had it all been a trick to make me stop? Or was there someone else out there watching? My body refused to calm down. I sat there for nearly 10 minutes, staring at my reflection in the rear view mirror, trying to understand what had just happened. But deep down, I already knew the answer. That man was never in danger. I was. Even now, I cannot shake the feeling that I escaped something terrible that night. I never saw anything on the news about an injured man. No reports of a murdered dog. No police warnings about a killer on the loose. It was as if the whole thing had never happened. But I know what I saw. I know the way he changed, the way his fear vanished in a second, the way he smiled. I took a different route to work after that. I never drove down that road again, but sometimes, late at night, I still see him in my mind. That twisted smile, those darkened eyes. And I wonder what would have happened if I had let him in. Hello guys, which story scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. And thanks for listening, everyone. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.